Good morning. Last November, my third child, Jaisal, was born. So far, he's received his first dose of several basic vaccines against diseases like measles and polio. And even though some of those shots stung, they will help protect him for the rest of his life. Today, nearly 90% of all children born in Senegal will receive those same exact vaccines, and their parents will have the same sense of relief that I take for granted, knowing their child won't needlessly die from those preventable diseases. But while my son was immunized by a doctor in this great hospital in Washington, D.C., a Senegalese boy is more likely to get immunized by a community health worker in one of these. This is a health hut. In Senegal, USAID has worked with the government to build 12,000 of these throughout the country so that we can reach 400,000 children. Rather than staff them with doctors, we train members of the community to offer basic treatment. No hospitals, no doctors, but the same critical care my son received. There are several ways to define the challenge of extreme poverty. But one way is to describe it as a situation where billions of people have access to a few centuries of science and technology, and billions simply don't. In fact, throughout history, some of the greatest advances in development came from extending the reach of science and technology to those who didn't have it. In the 40s and 50s, entire wards of hospitals were filled with rows of iron lungs to treat people with polio. But the invention of a polio vaccine turned this debilitating disease into a solvable problem, and we are now on the verge of eradicating polio forever. In the 70s, a population explosion in South Asia was widely expected to doom the region to massive starvation and lasting poverty. But the discovery of high-yield wheat seeds inspired countries, donors, and rural villagers to start a green revolution and dramatically increase food production, saving hundreds of millions of lives. In the 80s, outbreaks of diarrhea threatened to kill millions of children with such frightening speed that doctors from Bangladesh to Mali were completely overwhelmed. But a simple innovation called oral rehydration solution empowered mothers to save their own child's lives, and they did so by the millions. Time and again, specific scientific, technological, and operational breakthroughs have really transformed insurmountable development challenges into solvable problems. But despite this past success, today, most development investments do not prioritize the search for these breakthroughs. The prevailing view in development is that poor countries should follow the pathway we followed. If a country wants to develop, it needs to build power plants and distribution grids. Then it needs hospitals, schools, banks, and roads. It essentially needs to repeat the last 200 years of industrialization and build all the human and physical infrastructure that defines life in the Western world. And it's no surprise, our thinking is naturally constrained by our own experience. But if we can harness our collective imagination, we can break free of this established path. 4 years ago, I traveled to a rural community in northern India to meet with farmers. They were telling me about their challenges. Hotter and drier growing conditions meant less food and lower incomes. Their children sometimes didn't go to school, and they struggled even to put food on the table. In our discussion, I asked if they had cell phones. Right away, I could tell they were deeply offended by my question. One farmer stepped forward, took a phone out of his pocket, and explained why they took offense. He said, "Even the goat herders have cell phones, and we're farmers." The wide reach of cell phones has now given us our most powerful platform we've ever had to reach the world's poor. These farmers can now use their phones to get market prices or agricultural advice and improve their incomes and their production. But the cell phone also demonstrates an alternative path to development. Rwanda isn't spending billions of dollars investing in a national telephone network. Instead, they're connecting to the world in a fundamentally different way. This is the Facebook map. It shows broadband connectivity, and you can see that Kigali is already having a surprising amount of success. In Haiti, we're not rebuilding brick and mortar banks that were devastated by the tragic earthquake. Instead, we're partnering with the Gates Foundation to start a mobile banking revolution, allowing people to save money and make payments with their phones. The challenge of extreme poverty hasn't changed. We still need to extend the reach of technology to the very, very poor. But how we do it must change. To put it simply, we need technologies that can be delivered in health huts, not hospitals. When I talk about this approach, it tends to make people nervous. They say science is too risky, or new technologies are too expensive, especially for the very poor. They say scientific breakthroughs can do some good, but will never turn southern Sudan into South Korea overnight. And they're right. Development is complex. It's a process that takes decades and requires strong institutions, good governance, and committed leadership. But scientific and technological breakthroughs do more than address specific technical challenges. They inspire collective action by turning things that seem impossible into solvable problems. A gel-based microbicide that prevents HIV transmission will give women the power to protect themselves against that disease. But it will also motivate governments, donors, and local communities to renew the fight against HIV/AIDS. A new drought-tolerant maize variety will empower farmers to feed their children and escape poverty. But it will also generate the public and private investment that is needed in agriculture to really sustainably end hunger for the long run. And new vaccines against diarrhea, pneumonia, and malaria will give this baby boy in Senegal today the same protection from those diseases that I take for granted for my own son. But it will also start a virtuous cycle of improved child survival, reduced birth rates, and more economic growth. These technologies are not silver bullets, but if we can invent them, we can provide a better life for billions of people around the world. Thank you.